Welcome to the third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, March 4th, 1801 to March 4th, 1809. Thomas Jefferson lived in Charlottesville, Virginia, and his house was called Monticello. Monty is simply a reference for house. As we'll see later, his best friend James Madison had a house called Montpelier, and so his house sits up high on a hill. It's not really a mountain, but again, that's kind of included in this name, Monticello. So again, you can imagine how much something like this would be worth today, but again, how much it would be worth back then in the 1770s. How much it would cost to have a house of this kind of magnitude, this size. It's going to be something that's very rare and most people did not have. As we know, Jefferson was the main writer of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. So obviously we know that he was not the only writer, he was not the only person who had input. We know that one of the topics that they avoid is slavery. We know about Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings, and so some of the ways in which that gets talked about. And so again, Jefferson's the main writer, but not the only one. And we know that when they edited it frustrated, angered him. We know he went shopping actually and bought a few things to kind of deal with his frustration over some of the changes that they had made. So additionally, Jefferson was the first Secretary of the United States under the presidential cabinet of George Washington. Arguably the most important Supreme Court case in national history is Marbury versus Madison. And essentially the big point of this is that you have the Supreme Court Chief Justice, John Marshall. And John Marshall is the Michael Jordan of Supreme Court Chief Justices. If you talk to lawyers, if you talk to judges, John Marshall is the man. Okay, John Marshall is Michael Jordan. He's not LeBron. Okay, he is the top guy. He establishes the concept of judicial review, okay, with this court case. And what it basically takes is it takes the Supreme Court and it takes the judicial branch and it elevates it in power to being on par with the other three branches. Judicial review establishes that the Supreme Court gets to decide whether a law is constitutional or not. And very importantly, if it's not, then they have this giant check and balance on the legislative branch and the executive branch as they create and craft these laws. So the judicial branch, after Marbury versus Madison, has established that it can throw those laws out, that it gets to decide whether or not it's constitutional. Now, very importantly here, under Jefferson's presidency, we have all the events that are going on in Europe with the Napoleonic Wars at this point, and Napoleon holds the territory of Louisiana. He doesn't know what he's going to do with it. He needs money to run his empire, to run his wars over in Europe. And so Jefferson, meanwhile, lives in a nation of farmers who need to move their goods down the largest river in the country through this large port of New Orleans. We offer first to buy the port of New Orleans, and then they say, hey, we'll do you one better. We will sell you all of the Louisiana territory. And this is an incredible deal. And so we're tired of our goods being taxed as we ship them down the river through New Orleans. And so France needs to make money. And so this is going to be something that ultimately Jefferson can't refuse. And here again, you can see the size of the Louisiana Purchase that doubles the size of the United States. Jefferson doesn't know whether or not he can do this. He's not sure if it's constitutional according to a strict interpretation of the Constitution. And so, ultimately, though, it's too good a deal to pass up. It's $15 million for all this land that doubles the United States. It comes out to, I think, 2-3 cents an acre. It's something very, very small. And so he can't pass it up. He buys the land sight unseen. They really don't know what's out there. And so the signing takes place in New Orleans. You see the large church in the middle, and over to the left is the building where they signed the Declaration of Independence in 1803. So having not known what's out there, he has to send Lewis and Clark to go explore it. And so Lewis and Clark will take what they call the Corps of Discovery, which is them and basically a lot of other guys out there. Sacagawea, or Sagagawea, there's many different ways of pronouncing this according to different people. Uh, Sacagawea will serve as their guide. She was married to uh, the French Charbonneau, and so she basically gives birth while they're on the trip, and they will reach the Pacific Ocean in 1805. Her biggest thing was not so much guiding them, it was basically translating for them at times. And so she did serve as a guide, and she did do some things in that capacity. But again, translation was in some ways the bigger help. But all of this will ultimately lead the way to settlement and a claim on the Oregon Territory. So here you can see Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea. Okay, and again, the path of their trip. Again, you have Jefferson's looking for a Northwest Passage, a route, a quick, like over water route to Asia. He's hoping that they can find a river that simply passes straight through to the Pacific. And instead, it doesn't really work that way. The Rocky Mountains break it up. You're going to have to, you're not going to be able to take a straight path downriver from St. Louis to the Pacific. And so that's not really present. But again, Jefferson has to explore that and uses Lewis and Clark to do that. And at the end of Jefferson's presidency, Jefferson will do something called the Embargo Act of 1807. France and England's war in Europe is causing us huge problems. Our ships, our sailors are again being harassed. And what this act does is it bans all trade, all our business, imports, exports. It kind of bans it all with Europe. And so imports and exports will decrease. There's still imports and exports taking place, but it dramatically decreases it. And this decrease in trade damages the shipping industry in New England. It hurts the South trying to sell cash crops overseas. You can imagine what this did to the U.S. economically. It was crippling. But it tries to preserve our neutrality, which is what we've been trying to maintain all along since George Washington. And this is a famous cartoon that gets shown often as it relates to the embargo acts. And you can see this guy holding the turtle. Hey, darn it, how he nicks him. Oh, this cursed, oh, grab me. And so, basically, this is a reference to, again, this trade. Okay, when Jefferson's presidency is over, he ends up being remembered as one of our greatest presidents. He sits atop Mount Rushmore as one of 4 presidents. Here's some of the construction. Okay, it today. Okay, and the Jefferson Memorial. Okay, and again, how we remember him is the main writer of the Declaration of Independence, drafter of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which had an influence on the First Amendment and religious freedom at the time of the Constitution, doubles the size of the United States with the Louisiana Purchase, and in 1806, he basically delivered a speech talking about the desire to abolish and end the slave trade at the first instance it was possible with the U.S. Constitution. Now, this abolishes the slave trade legally, but it does not end slavery. And so it stops the import of slaves from Africa, but it does not end slavery. But again, it was a step. Additionally, he is the founder of the University of Virginia in 1819 at the age of 76.